Another week has gone by. We celebrated Africa Day this week. Perhaps that might explain why everything you're wearing is black. Are you?
It's the season's color, but I don't expect you to know a lot about Chanel and the French fashion houses. But I think black is the new red, if you'd like. So yeah, I'm just going with the season's color.
So you were in a very celebratory mood this week because of Africa Day. You're not. The color is not a reflection of where you think we are as a continent and as a people.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Remember, a solid black is the most fashionable color in fashion.
Oh, right? Okay, that's good to hear because black is my favorite color.
Yeah.
So
so once in a while, and like I said, all the fashion houses in Paris, they've gone black, and Kanye West actually started off with Kanye West, and yeah, I'm just in sympathy with the world color at the moment.
Okay, that's fantastic. As you can see, George is away on business, so we have a friend of ours on the show who might not be new to many of you, Tafadzwa Mkomoedu. We're very happy to have you on our show.
I must say, when I was a young man back in high school, we used to see him on TV, so this is quite an honor, sharing this space with him. He used to be one of the top analysts, and we used to admire the way he used to look at the market, and we thought they were so intelligent. We're so young.
We were,
and very impressionable. But he certainly made an impact in my life growing up.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I must remind the audience not to take us too seriously. If there are any words of wisdom or great insights, they are likely to come from Tafadzwa. Tinashe and I are not to be taken too seriously. We're just some mates having a tipple at the end of another week. And what are you drinking this week, by the way?
Okay, so I decided to have Tanganda. I think this is the second time I've actually drank Tanganda on the show. And promoting local. When we started the show, I should drink tons of Tanganda or local brews. So I thought, let me come back home and drink Tanganda. Bags of flavor, they say. So yeah.
And you, Mukoma, what are you having? Are you also sticking to something local?
Yeah,
I see.
Local, I guess. Never really done this with alcohol, so and it's interesting. So I decided to keep it safe, stay away from whatever that is you're drinking. Yeah, so yeah, it's just a local person.
Yeah, I'm this side of the bar is always more interesting, and I'm sticking to my knitting, which is whiskey. I'm having a Tamdu, which is a single malt from the Speyside, and it's aged in sherry oaks.
Where is it from?
Scotland.
Okay.
The Speyside of Scotland, which is famous whiskey manufacturing region. And I decided to experiment with something new and interesting because George is not here and I can have it all to myself. Yeah, but thank you so much for coming to our show, Tafadzwa. And I think that in the history of our capital markets and government, you are probably a pioneer of sorts in that you started your career in the private sector, and you were with an organization that at the time was trailblazing, Kingdom, the show that Tinashe used to watch you on, Making Money Make Sense, is synonymous with innovation and excitement in our capital markets. And you then got to a very senior level in the private sector in capital markets, and you did something that's very rare in this part of the world, which is to move across from the private sector to the government to work as a regulator. And so that move in itself is quite rare. And what I also think is quite rare is for people who have made that transition to actually have a significant impact in the space that they take up. Because when you took over, you actually changed the regulatory framework. The stock market, you were very instrumental in pushing us to move from open outcry and outmoded trading to, automated trading. I think it's fair to say that a lot of progress that we enjoyed in our capital markets over the last 15 years, you were instrumental or had a hand in making it happen. So that's also quite unusual. So maybe you can just, walk us through that. What made you actually think seriously about moving to government and then actually accept the job? And then for a person who doesn't have a lot, you're not a politician by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
So for you to have such an impact without being a political player, how did you manage that as well?
Yeah, it's interesting where to begin. So the transition from private sector to public is not that unusual. I think it happens quite a lot. I think in this space in particular, it was an opportunity that was there, I think certainly. The commission, I think, came at a time when I think we just needed some kind of direction, just for capital markets in general. And I was actually quite instrumental in its setting up because before I joined the commission, I was in asset management and I was chair of the Association of Asset Managers. And if you look at the Securities Act, and even the first board that was set up by the commission, we were actually part of I sat on a committee that nominated those board members, so from the beginning, really, you're looking at even the act itself, how the commission got started. So I was there. So I saw what this new creature, how important it was, what sort of role it was going to play in our capital markets. And I've always hoped that it will play the role that it was set up to do. And then at a personal level, I think in those days it was quite, well, I don't know if it was common then, but I joined this industry at a time when indigenous banks and bank owners were the thing. I mean, we're talking late 90s into the early 2000s. Obviously, that's another story, how that all unraveled, and there's still some standing now, but a lot fell by the wayside. So I was quite exposed to senior position at a very young age. I think when I joined the commission, I was 42, but I think I'd already been managing director of asset management companies for like 10 years, 12 years, I think. So for me, I'd reached a stage where I felt that within asset management itself, I think I'd done quite a lot, I'd achieved quite a lot. Maybe what I could have done possibly is to maybe set up my own asset management. But I felt at that time I had something that I could offer this new body that was coming in, which I was quite instrumental in setting up. So really, I think that's what motivated me. When I was being interviewed for the job, I think it was said to me several times that, look, this is something that could either make or break you. It's a challenge. The market right now is unsettled. We don't know which direction it's going to go. So
at the time, a lot of asset management companies were actually closing down. They're being closed down.
I think that had happened before. I think that tsunami happened when Governor Gono took over at the central bank. That was 2003. Yeah. So, okay, again, a bit of a backstory to that. So that's the time when we're really trying to advocate membership into the Association of Asset Managers, because there was no regulation. The regulator was within the Ministry of Finance. And then so you had asset managers passing off really as banks, deposit takers. And I think that's what caused, that the whole thing came crashing down. So when the central bank, Governor Gono took over the central bank, he then took over regulation of asset managers. I think overnight they deemed them as banks, and immediately again, that fallout happened. So you had a lot of firms shutting down.
And to be fair to the governor, I think that's one of the things where he came in and he actually cleaned up, and his impact was positive.
Yes,
I
it
don't know
was.
about that.
Okay, sometimes, you want, yes, it was good in just stopping whatever nonsense was going on. But also, I think it went a bit far. So it even hurt legitimate businesses like the ones that we're running. So as an association, we sort of foresaw that coming. And I think that was my first involvement really with authorities as I was chairing that association, that they reached out to us, which was good, or they consulted us, through that association to communicate to our members and so forth. So I think that worked well. And but that regulation, I guess, to what I presume you're going to say about that, you're not so sure about that. There was a bit of overreach as well. So the asset management industry was not regulated in the way that it should have. So that's part of the reason I also felt that it's something that I could do better at the commission, treat this industry in the way that it should be treated. So the first thing that I did when I went there, is we met with the central bank and said that, look, asset managers have to really come under the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so the whole idea of looking at capital market players as banks was just wrong. It was bad for their growth, and even just how they operated, was not going to work. So I think that was the first thing that really happened at the time that we did that. So, okay, maybe to your question, it was, for me, it was, I think in the private sector and asset management, which is really my strength, because I'd really come through as an analyst, fund manager, and then managing director. I'd done that. And there was an opportunity for me, I felt personally, that I could make an impact to our industry, because there was a lot of crying foul by a lot of players in our industry that the regulations did not understand.
The market.
Yeah, exactly. So
that raises a question in my mind, which is what you were able to convince the government is that the framework for the regulation of capital markets was less than ideal. And, the way SEC is modeled, it's based on international best practice. You have similar regulation of capital markets in the West. But one of the things that has remained archaic in terms of our regulatory framework in financial services is the way the banks are regulated, because everywhere else in the world, they've moved to a model where the central bank is really just a banker for banks and
monetary policy.
And the licensing and regulation of banks is handled by a different authority. So in South Africa, for example, they've got the South African Reserve Bank, and then they have the Financial Services Authority.
FCA,
so
the UK as well.
FCA.
So you were able 15 years ago to make this important transition in the regulation of our capital markets, but our banking system, which is much older, still has this archaic regulatory framework. So why do you think, because I suspect that there are bankers who also want to modernize the regulatory framework for banks. Why do you think you were able to move us along?
It sounds like it's a maze, and you were able to navigate.
Okay. Yeah, so something new like capital markets regulation was new. So it was a blank canvas, right? It had no history, it had no past, so you could literally shape it into the way that you wanted. You can imagine now with the banking infrastructure here, going back, I don't know how many decades.
Yeah, more than 100 years.
Yeah. So you've got things that have worked. And the model that you're talking about, it's a recent development within central banks. I remember in South Africa, they call it Twin Peaks. Yeah. So I think essentially what they want to bring, I think it started in the UK. When the FCA was set up. So FCA is really just about the conduct of all financial market players. So you're talking of capital market players, banks, insurance, they all fall under that FCA. Central bank then becomes monetary policy and exchange rates, interest rates, and so forth. Right. So in South Africa, they called that project Twin Peaks. I think it took them, I remember when I started interacting with them in maybe around 2015, 2014, they started that project, right? So literally they broke up their central bank into two, Prudential and the
monetary policy.
Yeah. So that FCA now is similar to in the UK. That FSCA in South Africa is now similar to the FCA in the UK, right? So it's a recent development. It didn't happen overnight, right? Now, for it to work, you need one regulatory body to then do the licensing and the conduct of players, right? Which means in this case, if we were to do that in this country, for it to work, it means that that body will literally absorb part of the licensing and supervision at the central bank, SEC, and IPEC into one. So that's what they've got now in South Africa, right? And so all the licensing of banks, insurance.
So why can't we do it?
I don't know.
You sound like the right man to do the job.
Okay, yeah. So ask yourself, why did they do it, right? So why is it not working? And it's not all countries, by the way, okay, that they've gone that route. It's only certain countries, not all countries in the world. Some central banks still do both.
Okay.
Monetary policy, your normal bank of government and monetary policy, as well as banking supervision and regulation. So there are some countries, some big economies as well, that still do that, right? So this is an option. So you've got to look at yourself and say that what's not working with this one. Now, the advantage of this centralized one is that all your financial sector players are under one roof, right? So if I give you an example, in this country, you've got a bank, a holding company, financial services company with a bank, insurance company, asset managers, brokers, and so forth. They essentially got three regulators, right?
Absolutely.
And part of the job of a regulator is to go and do inspections, get returns, and so forth. And a lot of the services of these holding companies are centralized. So you're talking of audit, you're talking of finance, IT, and so forth. So it's not inconceivable that you may go there for an inspection, you find SEC is there, central bank is there, IPEC is there, all asking the same questions. So if you centralize
there's inefficiency there.
Yeah, so if you centralize it like that, it's just one license to this holding company to play in the financial services sector. Obviously, you will then have specialists, some that do pensions, insurance, securities, banking, and so forth. But in terms of conduct of the board, screening the board, and so forth, that can all be done in one place. So I think that's one advantage of it. Now,
so let's be clear, you're talking about the twin structure.
The Twin Peaks, that's what they call it in South Africa. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you now just have
one financial regulator.
Yeah. So
and then the other just becomes a purely monetary policy.
Yeah. So so the Twin Peaks, to simplify it, is that you've got one of the peaks does your supervision, licensing, and your day-to-day regulations of these players, right? The other one now, this is where then there's market conduct and then there's prudential regulation. So you split that into that. So even if you're an asset manager, you sort of still report to the two, right? But one is for your licensing, day-to-day regulations and so forth. But when it comes to policies, formulation of those sort of things, that other peaks take care of. So if it's,
what are the advantages of the twin?
So I'm saying that you've got to look at the situation now and ask yourself, is it, what's not working? Yeah. So in South Africa, their argument was that there's a lot of companies that are reporting to multiple regulators. Let's centralize that. So I think that's
for efficiency.
For the efficiency. So I mean, if you're to take in this country, say, someone like Old Mutual, they report to all those three regulators, right? So literally they collapsed those regulators into two.
Okay.
So that's what that Twin Peaks is. But South Africa was always different in the sense that before this Twin Peaks happened, you had SEC, IPEC, and your pensions regulations, your medical aids were all under one regulator.
Okay.
So it wasn't.
Medical aid is actually under Ministry of Health.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah. So pensions and insurance are there. You got your NASAs also.
So there's need to just regularize our financial services. So
that's what I'm saying, that it depends with the country. So if in places like the States, all those are regulated. I mean, they're even more fragmented regulations in the States with the.
Well, I suppose the big problem with Zimbabwe is the quasi-fiscal activities. There's a lot then that where your regulator is also your player in the same market.
I wouldn't say that would really be a problem. I mean, you do find that there are state-owned players at all these markets and so forth. So I wouldn't say that would be a reason why not to do it. But what's more important, I think, is to just look at your current setup and say to yourself,
how can it efficient?
Exactly?
I mean, how can it?
Yeah. So yeah. But if these regulators can work well together, I think there's no reason. And also, even in South Africa, people are going to, dismantling structures like that is not easy. So you can imagine also here.
Tough wars, yeah.
That,
anyway, the producer is jumping up and down about us paying the rent. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You were making an interesting point about how there's inertia in some of these institutions, which makes it harder to reform and change them.
Yeah, I think it's only natural. So again, if you look at it, in terms of financial sector regulation, it's a very new thing in this country, right? So the model that we took was really the American way, where you've got your SEC, which is totally different from the central bank. And they actually do much, much more than what we do here. So they even regulate, to some extent, your auditors, your credit rating companies. I mean, they go, even the issuers of securities, even some investors to some extent as well. So you're not going to see the SEC and the Fed in the States doing Twin Peaks, right? So they've invested in those structures. So you can go it like that, right? And in America, again, insurance and pensions are probably two different regulators, and they work fine, right? So before you start saying that, okay, it's happening in the UK, it's happening in South Africa, let's do it here. I think just weigh the benefits of that. Why did they do it? And is it something that can work here? And at the end of the day, you've got to deal with the people running those institutions that they want to do it. So if they drag their feet, they could just scuttle the whole thing. So yeah. But right now, I would say that I think there's enough cooperation and coordination between the regulators. I think it works. The situation I spoke about, where you find 3 regulators at one place at the same time, I think we stopped that. So there is some coordination. There's a lot of sharing of information, even in licensing as well. So if you're licensed by SEC, I think in the not too distant future, it should be just possible if you want then a license to say at IPEC, for SEC then share those files with IPEC, so that you don't have to
go through the same, jump through the same hoops.
Yeah. So look, it depends how you do it. And all those bodies are also under the same ministries. So there's a forum that the minister created where the regulators meet once a month with the minister. So if there are any issues, again, I think those can be sorted out. So I would say that, look, yes, I think you can theorize about twin peaks or merging all these things, but I think the system that's there now can work, and I like to think that it's working.
Well, the banks will often complain that they are in a compromised or conflicted position at times, because they're regulated by the Reserve Bank,
Yeah.
and the Reserve Bank is also a player in the banking
A
sector. So
significant player.
if they
How the central
issue,
bank have play in
so if they want
On the
to,
auction rate, for
if they want to issue treasury bills, for example, and you're a bank MD and you get a call, and you know you're nudged to support the paper, you know it might be your position, you know, that you don't want to touch TBs with a barge pole, but you know in the back of your mind, this is also your regulator, and if you don't play nice,
I think the bottom line with money markets, central banks are central in any functional money market. So you can't have, go to any jurisdiction anywhere in the world, right? Money markets, central banks are the biggest player on both sides, buying and selling, and even creating instruments on behalf of government. So you're talking about your T-bills, even government stocks and so forth. So they're a market maker, they're a broker, you know, they're an issuer. You know.
So isn't that a strong case for that role to be separated from licensing and regulation?
It is within the bank.
Well, Chinese walls.
The same person, okay, we within the central bank, you've got departments, you've got exchange control, money markets, you've got...
yeah, but they're all reporting to the same...
To one person.
One person, the same individual.
That's why I'm saying that, okay, so if you've got those sort of issues, right, to me, okay, the problem is not so much that the central bank is sort of nudging or is exerting undue influence on banks to take certain position on their paper. I think the problem that you've got in this country is that maybe the inflation is just too high and the rates are too low. You know, but if you go back to when we started, when they used to do those Thursday auctions, banks would scramble to buy that central bank paper because
it was attractive. It was risk-free,
yeah.
and
so,
it had a real
so the problem for
interest rate.
Roof is not that you know they're being forced. It's just that the paper itself or the macroeconomic.
But that's the moral hazard, right? That you can't have TBs at 18% when inflation is...
So maybe this is a good point to actually segue into something that was in the news this week, which is the month-on-month inflation number. You know, so it's, well, the month-on-month was 21%. The annual rate 132. So we're definitely back in hyperinflation. You know, there's no doubt about it. And you know, so
I think most significantly, the TB rate is at 18%.
Yeah. So okay. So then,
and then now you have the regulator, who's also a market maker.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. That wherever you go, even if with Twin Peaks or whatever, that's going to happen, right? Because even behind the scenes, the central bank and these fellow regulators all report to the same ministry, to the same government. They want the same thing, right? Government wants to borrow money from you, right? So the question is that ultimately, right, the investors have to push for a real rate of interest, right? Now, if inflation is 132, say, then your rates should be at least some basis points above that 132.
Yeah, we should effectively have
it's not
money market paper indexed to inflation. But one of the reasons, the point I was going to make, sorry, Tinashe, is one of the reasons why you don't hear, you know, so you've seen CZI come out and say, look, the following policy actions we believe are bad for business or for industry. ZNCC will come out and issue a statement saying, look, you know, we have a problem with ABCD, please reconsider. But you hear nothing but silence from the Bankers Association of Zimbabwe.
Well,
because
because of that, because of the regulator is also a market player.
Because they can't come out and be seen to criticize the person who issues their license.
Or can potentially investigate the bank.
So because you make a very valid case for the investor, which is, and the biggest investors on the money market in our country today are banks. And they would love nothing more. They would love nothing more than real interest rates. And I think all savers would love that as well, because it means when you receive Zim dollars, you don't have to worry about making a plan to ring fence them from inflation, because you're going to earn an interest rate that maintains your purchasing power. So what do you think happened there? Because once upon
Could I just add another
sure.
nuance to this conversation? The central bank actually is mopping money from the banks and taking it at 0%.
Those NCD,
the NCDs,
yeah,
where it mops up the money and it's at 0% and you've got inflation at 132.
Yeah. So all those things you're talking about, those are functions of the central bank, right? Managing the amount of money in the system. Right? So how do they do that? You issue TBs, you buy back your TBs, those sort of things. I think what's just making all of this unsavory is that just inflation is just too high, and interest rates have not caught up to that. Now, maybe the banks might not have a voice, but it's not the bank's money. Ultimately, it's investors. Right?
It's depositors.
They're the ones who should be making that noise. That look, I'm not going to place my money in the bank if I'm going to get negative returns, and which is why perhaps there's so much money outside the bank.
The National Mattress Bank of Zimbabwe.
What's actually happening is another animal within the central bank, which is the FIU, is now investigating anyone. So if it's an institution that decides that, you know what, I'm not going to keep my money in the bank, and I'm going to take my money out, then you have FIU following you.
Look, but if you can explain yourself, look, I worked with FIU very well. I mean, there's nothing wrong. If my salary went into the bank, say it's $10 million, say Zim dollars, and I took it all out.
It's good.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, they'll come and ask me. Yes, I took my, as long as you can explain it, I think the big buzzword within FIU circles is unexplained wealth. If you can explain it, then you got a problem, right? But the point I'm making is that I think what all this points to is that our money markets, are non-existent because the rates that they're offering are sub-inflation. That's your problem. Fix that, and all the things you're talking about will not be a problem. You see, the central bank, can't stop doing what it's doing because it's supposed to do that. Maybe in their mind,
it's 0%. Taking money and giving people at 0%. But anyway,
these are your stat reserves and things like that.
There's something that's very interesting that you said in the public forum. I think in an interview that was done, and you talked about the innovation within the asset management, and you particularly looked at the small investor and unit trust. That there hasn't been any innovation. I mean, when you came into the market, unit trust was a buzzword, and now that has more or less collapsed. Would you like to speak more on that?
So I think it's just the whole approach of our industry. I think it's something I was talking to Aru earlier on. I think we're also sharing just now that the charges have been revised. There's an essay that's come out today, I think, about the new charges out on the market. So brokerages come down and so forth.
From 0.92% to 0.76%.
So if you look at unit trusts, right, to me, I think it's a medium. Okay, first of all, I say to myself that if you look at the returns that we've had on the stock market over the past 5-6 years, right, those were serious, good returns. And a lot of people in this country earn Zim dollars, right? They would have done better perhaps out on the market rather than elsewhere, right? With minimum risk, and so forth. But the fact that
without being a criminal and buying a currency on the parallel market.
But the fact that only a handful of people did that, to me, that shows me that not enough is being done to realize where the future could be, right? I think the mindset has not also changed in the sense that the use of technology has not been adopted by a lot of our players, right? So to them, it's still quite costly for me to launch a unit trust fund and market it, okay? Because I'm thinking here, I'm going to place ads in the paper, on TV, and so forth, and I've got to have branches everywhere in the country for people to then walk in and put their, I don't know, small amounts a month and that sort of thing. So this is why I'm saying that mindset has not changed. I mean, when we were doing that program, that was back in 97, 98, right? We didn't have smartphones, right? I mean, we had phones, okay, that could do SMS and things like that. we couldn't transfer money on the phone. Internet banking was non-existent, right? Advertising in those days meant taking out a page in the Herald or time on ZTV. Now, you tell me that
it's ubiquitous.
we are sitting here today, reaching people all over the world, through this program, right? This is where things have gotten, and it's all about IT, right? So, and the fact that hundreds of thousands of Zimbabweans have not had that opportunity to know that this market is potentially this rewarding, right? So people.
So if there's that huge market, why are the market players not reacting to it?
Actually, that's the brokers themselves. I mean, it's the same thing with not just asset managers, right? Brokers as well. You speak to any broker, right? Even with these commissions of what is now down to 0.75,
0.76.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a huge squeeze on brokers.
Look, I
no, but it's still
I'm no
quite a lot. Okay, but you must realize that this industry has not segmented itself, or rather specialized, right? Everyone just goes for the big kill, right? So you're all chasing that big deal and so forth. But when we were growing up, there were not many banks, but there were certain banks that were truly retail, and they specialized in that. It's your POSB, your CAMS, right? They specialized in the small depositor, right? But they offered them such good perks, and they had huge assets, right, as a result of that. But they specialized in that. Now, I'm saying that back when I think unit trusts were a big thing in the late 90s, at Kingdom we had over 150,000 account holders. Right? Now the entire CSD, both of them, the ZSC and the CSD and the CDC1, they don't have more than 15,000 accounts trading on that. Now, are you telling me that this is as big as this market is? That our stock market that we talk about, we're only talking of active people, that many.
And actually, the
potential market of
the actual
millions.
number will be significantly less than that, because some of the bigger institutions will have many
Numerous
accounts.
Yeah.
So in terms of actually,
so what do we need to do? What would you do differently?
Yeah. So I'm repeating myself. Okay, I've said this to the brokers. They didn't like me when I said it in Young.
I was a huge fan of what you were saying.
Yeah. So I think essentially the problem is capital, right? I don't think a lot of people take that industry. I'm speaking specifically of brokers and asset managers as businesses that can potentially grow, right? We've had the stock exchange in this country. Okay, 1974 is when the Stock Exchange Act was promulgated. So, okay, let's take it from there. That's over 40 years ago, when we actually had, an established industry of brokers. None of those firms ever graduated to being a listed company, to be a multinational company. All of them have branches here in Harare. They're nowhere else. So you are talking of an industry that sees itself as small players. And I like to give an example of the guys who change foreign currency. If I was in that space 10 years ago, I was changing money at Eastgate. Surely by now, my friend, if I was in that industry, my ambition would be that I'll be employing 100 people on every street corner, and I'll be sitting in a fancy office somewhere, watching my dashboard of what they're doing. So, okay, it might sound harsh, but this is how I see your asset managers and the brokers. They're still on that corner 15 years later.
Okay.
They have not grown.
Innovated. Have they made money?
It's not reinvested back in the business.
Okay. So they've made money in their personal capacity, but the business hasn't.
Yeah. So
you're saying they're not hungry enough?
No. Okay. Money in that industry is very easy to make. One good deal, ask any broker. You could
change your life.
You see, what do you do with that money? They invest in other businesses, properties.
Okay. They don't even believe in.
Yeah. Now, if someone invested more in their IT systems,
growing their business,
moved with the internet and the smartphones, even employed. I asked these guys to raise their hands. This was a room full of brokers. How many of them had IT departments? I think there was only one that raised their hand. This is 2022 that we're talking about.
Okay.
Sorry, that was 2020, I think.
No, that was last year.
Yeah, 2019.
Maybe let's step back a bit. An institutional memory which you have, it might make us understand what made Kingdom go for the mass market, the retail guy.
Because the business opportunity was there, it was a no-brainer. Because also in this industry, like anywhere else, right, your margins are squeezed the more up market you go, right? Okay, in terms of the demand or what you give to your clients, right? You can charge much, much more for smaller amounts, but it's about aggregating those small amounts into something big, right? So it's something that no one was doing, so it was just there, right? Okay. Telling someone that, look, in whatever money you are earning, put X amount a month into this fund, right? Back then, I think with real money markets, real interest rates, I think our money market fund was popular, it was easy to explain, and people just poured money into that,
Okay.
So yeah, so again, it's just someone sitting down and saying that if I look at all this money sloshing around in this country, right? What are people doing?
I mean, what are Makorokoza doing with the
It's just
money?
finding the language to speak to that person and formalize. It doesn't have to be shares, it doesn't have to be money market. But the fact that you're an asset manager, you're an investment professional, you should be able to interpret whatever challenges or risk and return profiles of any person into something, even that property. Why can't you manage it well for them?
That's true. Would you say that, because I'm trying to find an explanation here, that the new entrants in the 90s could see the opportunity and they just went for it. But what then happened after Gono is all those new banks are gone. So it's the same guys in the 90s.
But well, the entrepreneur, so maybe the point Tinashe is making is that there was a certain entrepreneurial spirit
that could take the risk
of, and one of the things that happened with the failure of a lot of these institutions and the regulatory reform that also ensued, limiting how much a founder could own in the institution, and other reforms, basically killed the entrepreneurial, innovative spirit in the sector and made everybody more conservative. And one can argue that maybe the market is better off for it. What's your view?
Look, I don't quite buy that story. Look, owning 100% of a company, okay, it's an old adage, that would you rather have 100% of a cupcake or I don't know, a little slice of a triple decker cake or whatever, right? It's the same sort of thing, right? Yes, there were limitations on ownership, but when I said it was stopped in one, so you go for a listing. If your ambition is to grow, right, you can still own 5% out of a much bigger thing, right? And people always respect a founder, right? If your vision is well placed and well meaning, and you've got a good track record, people are going to give you that space to champion your vision or to execute your vision on that business, right? So I wouldn't say that was a problem as such, right? The problem for me was that I think the fragmentation that happened, right? Right now, if you're looking at the number of clients that I told you, what would be a decent number of asset managers and brokers in this country? Do those numbers justify, I don't know, more than 5 brokers, 5 asset managers?
No.
You see, but I'm sure the SEC is licensing them by the quarter. More are coming in. So that entrepreneurship, right? So if you look at those sort of firms, they are the sort of things that can go into large partnerships, right? But instead of a youngster qualifying as a broker, starting his own, what is it that we are not doing to retain that person, so that we use that energy that he has to grow this business? We give him stake right into that. That's why I'm saying that these are people in capital markets. They have ambition to also list, right?
Yet that has never happened.
Hence, I'm saying that, my example of Eastgate, that it's something that in the minds of the operators, it's something that works very well in a very small environment,
All Boys Association.
It's effectively a gentleman's club. You have a statutory commission, and you're guaranteed, to make a bunch of money without doing anything particularly exceptional or innovative. So anyway, my producer is jumping up and down again, so we have to let Tinashe powder his nose. We'll be back shortly.
Sawira huya timborangana timboronga tichine mkana handirambe isheni novuma kana mati yangu nguva yakwana sawira huya timborangana timboronga tichine mkana daita isiva ramangwana taingovunza ndewani mukana dainda isiva ramangwana taingovunza nderani jana sawira uya timborangana timboronga tichine mkana sawira uya timborangana timboronga tichine mkana daita isiva ramangwana taingovunza ndewani mukana dainda isiva ramangwana taingovunza nderani jana sawira uya timborangana timboronga tichine mkana.
Welcome back. I think we're going to pivot here a little bit because we had Africa Day this week, and I wanted us to maybe reflect and have a chat about it a little bit. Unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, Africa is perceived as a dark continent. It's associated with war and famine, and I think we're all reasonably young and have children and would want to wake up, or would hope that they wake up one day in a world where people talk about Africa without talking about war and famine and poverty and corruption and all the things that and so I think the last country to get independent was South Africa in 1994. It's been 28 years of an independent Africa. If you were to score us, as a continent in terms of progress or lack of progress, since we were all independent, how would you score us? And to follow on that, what would you do differently if you were appointed emperor of Africa and you were given a 25-30, a sufficiently long reign to actually make a difference? What sort of things would you do?
Yeah, so the scorecard, like the teachers always say, is that can do better. Certainly, I think the opportunities I think we missed as a continent. I think certainly the fact that we got our independence, all countries are now independent. I think that should always be a starting point. I think personally, what I've felt is missing is just a vision that identifies with Africa, that takes into account the situation that a particular African country is in, and because of that lack of vision, we are pulled in all sorts of directions, because maybe of our lack of confidence in ourselves, you get the World Bank, IMF, literally setting the conditions, for you to do X, Y, Z. And because we don't have an established or a deep-rooted vision or belief that this is possible and this is what we're going to do no matter what, it's like running a company. You just need that visionary leader who sees where you are going, right? And look, our natural resources, I think we speak about them all the time, but now because of that lack of vision or lack of knowing what to do best with them, other people are now benefiting them or now sort of enjoying the benefit on our behalf. you know. And so if I was that emperor, really, I think is to just say to myself, you know, take stock of what Africa means, right? Now, obviously, a lot of the aid that comes, the conditions are democracy. Now, whose kind of democracy? What shade of democracy, right? I don't see, okay, there are a few countries with democracy that you can liken maybe to, you know, Western type at the democracy, but the majority of countries would never get to that level. But does it mean that until they do, then they can't develop the, you know, I think.
But is aid even a solution? Because if you listen to somebody like a renowned economist, Dambisa Moyo, you know, she actually thinks that aid has been a net negative for African countries. So should we really base our vision as a people, as a continent, on the charity of people?
That's my point exactly. Okay. You start, okay, with any strategy, right? Now you're doing it on a national scale or continental scale. You start with what you've got, right? We've not fully appreciated what we have, right? We should be able to getting much better deals on all of these things. I mean, you talk of your natural resources and all the things that we have, right? Those are the things that we should be bargaining with, right? But because you've not taken full account or stock of what you have, someone sees that value more than you, right? And then come to you. Now, this thing of aid, okay, it's just in corporate finance, right? You need probably that bridging finance, you know, but you are not also showing the sort of security and guarantees that you have. Therefore, you are now, what's supposed to be an investment is now coming in as aid. Mm-hmm. To me, I think we should just be doing serious deals, right? Look, I've got this stuff here, and the price is that, right? You know, that's what we should be doing, you know, and we're not doing it. And as a result of that, you know, the more astute businessmen out there will see these weaknesses, are exploiting it in a very big way. I mean, you look at the food situation now in the world. I think in terms of agriculture, you know, if you just organize agriculture on this continent, we could feed the whole world, you know. But what does it take? You know, those people can't come here as if they're doing us a favor. You know, it has to be a business transaction, right? That what do I get from it? I'll give you the land, maybe the labor, and this beautiful climate that I have. You bring the technology, and when we export these things, we share the profits. You know?
I'll take a more controversial view. If you look at the people that colonized Africa, so first of all, I take the view that colonialism was inevitable everywhere around the world. Colonialism or imperialism was more or less inevitable. But if you look at the imperial powers, by its very nature, they were extremely well developed. So the guys that are actually taking over or that are colonizing are well developed. They're very clear in terms of vision, what they wanted to do, what they wanted to do. But if you look at the reverse that then happened about the people who took over after colonialism, they were not clear. They were not tested. So it's not a guy who had been tested elsewhere in an extremely developed country who is actually saying, oh, okay, I'm going to take over and this is the vision. This is how we're going to do it. So unfortunately, how we start sort of determines what happens 40, 50, 60 years later, because that mentality hasn't changed. The guys who took over had no idea how to run a country. I think Minister Mohadi, well, when he was the VP, he said something that was controversial, but I think quite true, that nobody actually sat us down and said, well, this is how you actually run an economy. And unfortunately, we're starting to see some, you know, beautiful sprouts of very innovative governments. But unfortunately, that mindset that took over, and that's the politics. I continuously say that there's a disconnect between our politics and our economics. Because I think economics, we are ready.
Should that not just affect us at the beginning? What? But now, okay,
because it's 25 years later.
28 years later.
60 years later.
Now, we should be figuring it out that...
no, what actually happens is they then set up So I'm going to connect what you said previously. And that what happens is the lack of innovation is these people then set up their own old boys association with their own norms, right? And they are very comfortable, right?
So basically, here you're talking about OAU, which is now the AU,
which is
and
now
they
the
have these talk
AU,
shows every year, and they talk.
And the thing is, now we're probably second generation or third generation, and whoever wants to get in, you have to get in through that particular door of we fought the war, and that mentality is what then persists. So you almost need a radical shift. Some people who can now create a new vision. Otherwise,
and what would that vision be if you were to be emperor? What would Africa look like?
First of all, I would not want to be emperor, because the idea of an empire is what got us where we are. So first of all,
maybe from the sense of that you've got all the powers to institute whatever policies. And
no. I'm a libertarian, so I make that point just so that people's minds they change the idea that you need to be an empire to actually change. You don't. You actually need more freedom to the individual. I think that we need to connect the politics and the economics. The minute we connect the politics, because economically, and I totally agree, if you look at the African, what Africans are able to do economically, or even given half the chance, if you look at
there's
Zimbabwe,
a lot of potential.
just half the chance, you can see that economically they know what to do. People didn't need to be told in Zimbabwe to keep money in their pockets and not use the banks. you don't need a governor or whoever, politicians can come and say whatever they want, but people with their own economic interest, they know how to behave.
I guess it's human nature.
Exactly. So what we need to do is to connect the economics to the politics. Once you connect the two, I think that Africa will change.
But that's my point, right? So the politics, I think there's been a lot wrong, I think, on the continent. I mean, we've seen things that take us back. So the point I was making earlier is that are we going to wait for the politics to be right for us to start moving forward? Because we might never get the politics right. And what does it mean getting that politics right? So Africa, in my view, I think it's unique. I think in the world today, we've seen all types of governments and with various levels of success. Right, even the Western democracies now. I mean, there is a big debate that is that really what the world needs? I mean, just look at the polarization in the U.S. You've got two sides that the fact that they said it, even if it's right, the other side will not do it. So I'm saying to that maybe give Africa a chance to find its own politics that works for itself. Right, it might not be the script written elsewhere.
But I think you've touched on something quite interesting, which is the need for a vision. And if you think about the transition that Africa made from being colonies to independent countries, it started with a vision from the nationalists who said that we can't be second-class citizens in our own country, and they then sold this vision and created a movement, generated support for this vision, and then they were able to execute on this vision and make it a reality. And I think
was it, or it was
Britain,
end of World War II, and Britain.
We're not going into that rabbit hole, but
this is the end of imperialism.
I still think it's got a point.
But the point I want to make is
they could have sat back and not taken that initiative.
And I think that one of the reasons why the OAU and the AU have been so ineffectual is because people like us haven't really articulated a vision of where Africa could be if we took certain actions. Because if we articulated it enough and people could imagine a much more prosperous, peaceful, thriving continent, then they would buy into it and they would push for it to happen. And if you think about Africa and its borders today, right? It was a bunch of old white men at a meeting in Berlin in 1883, 84, sitting around a table, probably having a drink, saying, okay, fine, we'll give you guys this part and you guys can take this bit. And today, more than 100 years later, we still respect those borders. We treat them like gospel. You know, but we're the poorest continent on earth, right? We have 54 countries with 54 presidents, prime ministers, or you know, whatever the guys running the place want to call themselves. You know, we have 50 plus currencies. We have these tax regimes, and you know, and I think it's about, you know, in time that we had another conference, you know, like they had in Berlin in 1883, 84, where we say, you know what, guys, this isn't working. This is dumb.
Gaddafi had that vision. Look, sorry, I think going back there, okay, look at the EU. Okay, these are fairly developed countries, fairly similar. And how long did it take them in the sort of hassles that they went through? Now, trying to do that with 54 countries, again, with histories like we've had, to me, I think, you know, I'll propose something different, right? The OAU, okay, the first step of Africa being Africans was to liberate themselves from the colonizers. I think that we did very well. And the OAU played its part, right? Now it has to transition. What next? I think that's what you're now saying, is that we've got 54 countries here, spread across, you know, various levels of development and so forth, right? I don't think as a unit you can move all of them at the same pace. Now, what I would like to see is just a champion. One country that just breaks that mold and blazes a trail that everyone says, wow, you know. When that happens, I think it's easier to copy a formula that has worked, you know, than to try to align 54 countries into a single vision. You're not going to do it. There's still border disputes. Tribalism in Africa, I think, is a big thing. I mean, if you're talking in country,
3,000 tribes.
in country, what more continent-wide? So I would just like to see a champion. You know, we all marvel, and I think we've read about Singapore, right? That changed the whole perspective of Southeast Asia, right? One country, you know, and it inspired everybody else. I think we just need that inspiration. With whatever form of government, I think that country would then set the
I think
tone.
I can extend that argument, because I actually prefer that argument compared to the other argument, which is, so Rufaro, yours is we need to think top down. I actually believe it's more bottoms up, and it's more back to the city states.
Yeah.
Because remember, even Singapore, Hong Kong, these are city states that then grow and become much bigger. And that's what we should actually focus on. Focus on the individual countries, even break up the individual country. Because if you look at Zimbabwe, Mzarabani should be able to, under devolution, Mzarabani should be able to develop, invite its own investors, and be very successful. Because if Mzarabani is successful,
then we all go and live in Zarabani.
exactly, it's that simple and straightforward.
On that very interesting note, thank you so much for joining us.
That was a pleasure.
We really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we could, if the production team would allow us, just to be here all evening. So we hope you will check in on us sometime in the future. To our audience, thank you for joining us. Don't take us too seriously, and you know, have a great weekend. Be good. If you can't be good at it.
Thank you.